The air in the Los Angeles County Courthouse was thick with tension. The judge, lounging in his chair with a smirk, didn't take the 19-year-old defendant seriously. Jallen Dawson was just another teenager in trouble, or so everyone thought. But as the prosecutor laid out their case, Jallen stood poised, ready to unravel everything they'd assumed. No one expected this young man to take control, but what happened next would leave everyone in shock. Want to see how it all unfolds? Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Jallen stood there, still as a statue, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his hoodie. His heart pounded in his chest, but the outward calm he projected seemed almost unnatural for someone in his position. The judge, leaning back in his chair with a condescending smirk, didn't seem to notice. "Think you're some kind of legal expert, huh?" Judge Grayson's voice dripped with sarcasm, echoing off the stone walls of the courthouse. He glanced down at Jallen over the rim of his glasses, as though Jallen was just another lost kid with no place in a courtroom. His fingers drummed lazily against the polished wood of his desk. "This isn't a debate club, kid. Keep that in mind." The chuckles that rippled through the courtroom were like ice water on a fire, cold and dismissive. The bailiff snorted quietly. The stenographer tapped away on her keyboard with exaggerated speed, and even the prosecutor seemed amused by this teenager trying to play lawyer. But not Jallen. He didn't even flinch. He knew the game they were playing, and he wasn't going to let them control it. His mind raced, but he pushed the panic down, locking it away. He wasn't going to let them see a single crack. He wasn't just here to defend himself. No, this was bigger than that. He was about to show them all who they were dealing with. Years of practice, of absorbing everything his mother had taught him, came rushing to the surface. While most kids his age were memorizing football stats or replaying video games in their heads, Jallen was learning case law. He spent countless hours in mock trials, arguing with himself, testing out different scenarios. He knew how to manipulate facts, how to make them see things from his perspective. And today, he was going to do exactly that. Jallen's mother, Denise, had been a paralegal for over 2 decades. She came home every night, her head full of stories about the courtroom, the deals made behind closed doors, the times when the system failed people, the times when it didn't even try. She had unknowingly prepared him for this very moment. Every case she'd told him about, every trick she'd shared, all of it had led him to this. He wasn't the typical defendant, and he wasn't about to let them treat him like one. As the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood up to present his case, Jallen took a deep breath. Carrington's voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of voice that belonged in front of a jury. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted. Every inch of him screamed confidence. Confidence that Jallen was about to destroy. "Your Honor," Carrington began, his voice carrying through the room. "The state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jallen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before his arrest." The prosecutor went on, recounting how Jallen had been pursued by officers through downtown, how he'd tried to flee, how his fingerprints had been found on the steering wheel. The case seemed airtight. Each word Carrington spoke was like a hammer, pounding down on Jallen's defense. The gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering among themselves. The case on the surface seemed simple. Jallen had been caught driving a stolen car, and there was physical evidence to support. It was the kind of case that anyone could look at and think, he's guilty. But Jallen wasn't going to let that happen. The weight of the room settled on his shoulders, but it didn't break him. No, it only solidified his resolve. He was going to make them see the cracks, the mistakes they'd made. He wasn't just another kid in trouble. He was the one who was about to change the narrative. And they had no idea what was coming. Jallen stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving the prosecutor. His voice was steady when he spoke, though it carried an undercurrent of something much more powerful, something that made the room go quiet. "Your Honor," he said, his calm tone contrasting with the storm brewing inside him. "Before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution. Carrington raised an eyebrow, a little taken aback. He clearly hadn't expected Jallen to speak, let alone challenge him so boldly. You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel of the car, correct? Jallen asked, taking a step forward. He was pushing now, forcing the prosecution to answer questions they hadn't anticipated. That's right, Carrington said, a little too quickly, as if he couldn't wait to move on. He was ready for the next part of his argument. Interesting, Jallen said, his lips curling slightly. Then I moved to dismiss that testimony as evidence. He turned to the judge, locking eyes with him. On the grounds that Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the chase began. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Jallen could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. The prosecutor's smug grin faltered for a moment, but it quickly returned, though not quite as confident as before. The murmur of disbelief spread like wildfire, igniting the room with the kind of tension that only came when someone was about to reveal something huge. Jallen's heart raced now, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline that surged through his veins. He could feel the shift. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was dismantling the case, piece by piece. He was in control, and he wasn't letting go. From the back of the courtroom, Denise Dawson sat with her arms crossed, her eyes never leaving her son. She had been through this before, so many times, listening to the stories, reading the legal jargon, the case law, the motions filed. But watching Jallen stand there, so calm, so poised, it felt different this time. This wasn't just another mock trial in their living room. This was real. This was the moment he had been preparing for, even if neither of them had ever imagined it would come this way. Denise's heart ached with a mixture of pride and fear. She had raised Jallen on her own, doing her best to provide for him after his father left. She'd worked late nights as a paralegal, talking to clients about legal battles, teaching Jallen about the power of words, the importance of understanding the system. She had always told him that knowledge was power. But now, as she watched him standing in that courtroom with the eyes of everyone on him, she realized just how much he had taken in, far more than she could have ever imagined. Jallen had always been different. She'd known it from the moment he started asking questions about her work when he was barely 10 years old. He wasn't like other kids who wanted to play sports or watch cartoons. He wanted to learn about cases, about the law, about justice. It was as if something inside him had known that he would one day find himself in this very place, where his knowledge of the law would be his only defense. But now, as she listened to the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, spewing his accusations, her anxiety crept up. The case seemed airtight, too airtight. A stolen car, a chase, fingerprints on the steering wheel. Everything about it screamed guilt. And Jallen, standing at the defense table, didn't look like a typical defendant. He looked like a lawyer, like someone who belonged in that room. But would it be enough? Denise clenched her fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms as Carrington rattled off the details of the case. She had always known that Jallen was brilliant. There had been no denying it. But this was something else entirely. As the prosecutor continued, the pressure mounted. Was he really going to defend himself? Could he possibly pull this off? The weight of the decision hit Denise like a ton of bricks. She had never wanted him to be in this position, never wanted him to have to fight for his life in a court of law. And yet here they were. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Jallen's voice, steady and sure, as he spoke to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the Denise's heart skipped a beat as she watched him. He wasn't just speaking from memory. He was speaking from a place of deep understanding, from a lifetime of watching her, of absorbing everything she'd taught him. He was dismantling the case, slowly and methodically, like a surgeon cutting through layers of confusion and deception. For a moment, Denise's mind raced back to the countless nights she'd spent explaining the intricacies of the law to Jallen, helping him understand the flaws in the system, the biases, the shortcuts that were often taken. She had always feared for him, feared that the world would see him as just another black teenager, just another statistic. But now, seeing him in action, she realized that he wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for something much bigger. As the tension in the room grew, Denise's thoughts drifted to the neighborhood they lived in. She had always tried to protect Jallen from the harsh realities of the world outside. She'd kept him close, made sure he stayed out of trouble, kept him busy with books and mock trials. But she knew the truth. The world wasn't always fair. People who looked like Jallen often didn't get the benefit of the doubt. And as she watched him now, challenging the prosecutor, pointing out the flaws in their case, she could see it clearly. This wasn't just about one trial. This was about the larger system. The system that had already decided Jallen was guilty before he'd even walked through the door. Denise's breath caught in her throat as Jallen dropped the bombshell, his request to verify the officer's GPS logs. She could feel the shift in the room, the sudden shift in power. For the first time, it wasn't the prosecutor leading the charge. It was Jallen. The look on Carrington's face shifted from confidence to confusion, and Denise's heart soared. He was doing it. He was taking control. He was showing them all that they had underestimated him. But even as she felt pride swell in her chest, fear gnawed at her. The stakes were so high. What if this wasn't enough? What if they still found a way to convict him, despite the truth he was exposing? The thought of losing him, of watching him be swallowed by the system, was too much to bear. As the courtroom continued to hang on Jallen's every word, Denise couldn't help but wonder how many other young men like her son were, caught in a system that was stacked against them. How many had been sentenced to prison for crimes they didn't commit, simply because the world didn't want to see them for who they really were. Jallen had the knowledge to fight back, but how many others didn't? The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about Jallen's case. It was about the future, his future, and the future of so many others who had never been given a chance. As the judge called for a brief recess, Denise closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had never felt more proud of her son, but at the same time, she had never been more afraid. She just hoped that in the end, the truth would be enough. Part 3. The tension intensifies. Jallen takes the stand. The room felt like it was shrinking. Every eye was on Jallen, who stood confidently at the defense table. His heart still beat with an urgency he tried to suppress, but his outward calmness never wavered. He had to do this. The courtroom was holding its collective breath, waiting for him to make his next move. Jallen was now fully in control. The moment he'd spoken up, asking for the verification of Officer Ruiz's GPS logs, everything had changed. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, had stalled, but now it was too late to backtrack. Jallen had made his first strike, and the blow had landed right where it mattered. The courtroom, which had been filled with skepticism, was now quiet with expectation. Carrington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected a defendant to be so sharp. The prosecutor had gone into this trial with one goal: to win. To push for a conviction, to close another case in his long list of wins. But Jallen wasn't the defendant he had expected. He wasn't just a teenager from a broken neighborhood. He was someone who had been prepared for this moment his entire life. Carrington cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Your Honor," he began, but there was something off in his voice. The confidence was gone, replaced with a tightness that was hard to ignore. "The defense is wasting time. Officer Ruiz's testimony is valid. The evidence is clear. The defendant was in that car. He was caught in a stolen vehicle, and his fingerprints were found on the steering wheel." But Jallen wasn't done. He wasn't going to let the prosecution dismiss the one thing that could change everything. His calm demeanor belied the storm brewing inside. "You want me to believe that my fingerprints on a car prove I stole it? Is that your entire case?" Jallen's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "Let's think about this logically, shall we?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge looked up at Jallen, his gaze more focused than before. Jallen's voice remained steady as he turned to the jury. "Let's take a moment. If you try on a jacket in a store, touch it, and then leave without buying it, and later someone else steals that jacket, would the fact that your fingerprints are on it make you a thief? There was a moment of stillness. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jallen's analogy had struck a chord. It wasn't just a legal argument. It was something they could all understand. His logic was simple, but it was powerful. As Jallen spoke, he noticed something. The prosecutor's once confident expression was starting to crack. Carrington had made a mistake by underestimating Jallen. Now it was too late to backpedal. Jallen continued, "The car I'm accused of stealing wasn't even locked. I touched it. I leaned on it, but I didn't steal it. I didn't even drive it." He paused for effect. "And yet, here we are. The state wants you to believe that my fingerprints are enough to convict me. Is that really how justice works?" Jallen's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The room was silent. From the back of the courtroom, Denise could feel her chest tightening. The pride she'd felt earlier, watching her son take control, was now mingled with a sense of fear. She had taught him well, but this was more than she had prepared for. This wasn't just a legal argument. It was his life on the line. Every word Jallen spoke felt like a challenge, not just to the prosecution, but to the entire system. Her thoughts raced. Could Jallen really do this? Could he win? Or was this all just a dangerous gamble? She clenched her fists in her lap, willing herself to stay calm. She knew how brilliant he was, but she also knew how quickly things could unravel in a courtroom. What if this wasn't enough? What if they still found a way to twist the truth? Carrington's face turned red with frustration. He flipped through his notes, trying to find something to regain control of the room. But Jallen was unrelenting. He wasn't going to back down. "Your Honor," Jallen said, turning back to the judge, "I'd also like to point out that the forensic specialist who processed my fingerprints was never called to testify. How can we trust the evidence if we haven't had the chance to question it? How can we trust the results if there's no transparency?" The courtroom was silent, the tension palpable. Denise's breath hitched. Jallen was doing it. He was taking apart the prosecution's case piece by piece, exposing their weaknesses. She could see the uncertainty creeping into Carrington's eyes. This wasn't going as planned. The prosecutor, once so sure of his victory, was now scrambling. Jallen wasn't just defending himself. He was showing them all how the system could be manipulated, how it could fail those who didn't have the tools to fight back. And as Jallen stood there, calmly dismantling the case, it hit Denise like a punch to the gut. Her son was no longer just a victim of the system. He was challenging it, and that was something they hadn't prepared for. "Does the prosecution have any further evidence to submit?" Judge Grayson finally asked, his voice low but laced with an edge of something Denise hadn't heard before. Doubt. The words hung in the air. The prosecutor's face twisted with frustration. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jallen had done it. He had flipped the script. Denise couldn't help but feel a small surge of hope, but it was tempered by the realization of just how fragile this moment was. They weren't out of the woods yet, but Jallen had just shown them all that he was more than a defendant. He was a force to be reckoned with. The game was changing, and now there was no turning back. The courtroom was still, every single person holding their breath. Jallen stood there, his posture straight, his hands by his sides, waiting. The judge, once dismissive and mocking, now looked at him with something different: respect. Judge Grayson, who had once leaned back with a smirk, now leaned forward, his fingers steepled, studying Jallen with a seriousness that spoke volumes. "Mr. Dawson," the judge began, his voice steady but contemplative, "I've listened to your defense, and I've reviewed the evidence. You've made an impression on this court today." He paused as if weighing his words carefully. "Case dismissed." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it was as if time had stopped. The gallery erupted in shock and disbelief, some in awe of Jallen's poise, others simply stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Jallen remained motionless for a moment, letting the weight of those words sink in. He had done it. Against all odds, against the system that had already decided his fate, he had proven his innocence. Denise's breath caught in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. She stood up slowly, her legs almost giving way beneath her. Pride, relief, fear, it all mingled inside her. She had feared for her son's future, feared that the world would see him as nothing more than another black teenager caught in the system, a statistic destined to fail. But Jallen had proven that he was more than that. He was a fighter. And today, he had won not just his freedom, but the right to shape his own future. As Jallen walked toward the door, his mother met him halfway, her arms outstretched, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You scared me half to death," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I'm so proud of you." Jallen smiled, the weight of the moment finally starting to settle on him. "I had to take a risk, Ma," he said softly, his voice steady. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded him, microphones thrust in his face, flashing cameras blinding him from all sides. They were eager for a soundbite, for a glimpse of the young man who had outsmarted a seasoned prosecutor. But Jallen didn't care about the attention. The spotlight wasn't what mattered to him. What mattered was that, for the first time in his life, he had used his knowledge, his skills to fight back against a system that had written him off. As they walked to the car, Denise could see the change in her son. The young boy who had learned about the law from her stories, the teen who had dreamt of one day becoming a lawyer, had just taken his first step into that world. He wasn't just going to be a bystander in the system anymore. He was going to be a part of it, and he was going to change it. Jallen's journey had just begun. He had proven that knowledge, courage, and a relentless belief in justice could move mountains. And though today had been about one case, one battle, he knew this was only the start. The system was broken, and he would be the one to fix it. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, and wronged by the system. This was bigger than one trial. This was about making sure that the truth, not bias or assumptions, would always have its day in court. The court had dismissed the case, but Jallen Dawson's story was just getting started.